glad that you have come tonight, and I am certain that you will enjoy our wonderful program. Before the President speaks, I've been asked to say a few words about the significance of the year 1864 in my family. I just finished transcribing some letters that one of my ancestors wrote home to Mississippi to his family. He had been in the service since 1862, and he was my great-great-great-grandfather. And by the year 1864, he was writing home about the deprivations and the hardships of war. In his last two letters that he wrote home in the year 1864, he writes, quote, "I am nearly broke down with fatigue, with hard marching and fighting. The Lord only knows what will become of us. Our men were killed, and their bones lie bleaching in the fields near Atlanta. But I will not write more on this subject, for I am heart sick of such scenes." He left behind two little boys, aged 10 and 3, and a wife, when he was killed at the Battle of Franklin on November 30th, 1864. He is buried in the mass grave of 424 Mississippians at the McGavock Cemetery on Carlton Plantation in Franklin, Tennessee. I want to say a special thank you tonight to our partners for their support of this series. Wilson's Creek National Battlefield, the Civil War Roundtable of the Ozarks, Sons of Union Veterans, Phelps Camp 66, Friends of the Library, and the Library Foundation. It is thanks to their support and financial contributions that we are able to host these fantastic speakers for this series, including tonight's program. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the President.
All right.
Good evening, my friends, fellow citizens. It is a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity to be with you this evening, although I was told by my secretary as I was leaving Washington City that Secretary Stanton thought I was a plain fool for coming out here at this particular juncture. I told Mr. Hay, well, if Stanton thinks I'm a fool, I reckon I must be one. He knows more about those things than I do. But it is with greater pleasure that I have this opportunity to say a few things. The coming election, my friends, will perhaps be the most consequential in our history. May even be the last if certain elements among us have their wishes. And I'd like to say a few things regarding the coming election. There are some reminiscences that come to my mind 4 years ago. I frankly think, at least I hope, that after this evening, the difficulties which seem to be presented regarding the intricacies of politics and strategies and so forth will be so clear that you'll be reminded of this little story. 4 years ago, out in Illinois, there was a Democratic speaker named Randy who was doing everything he could to stop the possibility of a Republican victory. And so of an evening, he had a rather large crowd, and he brought two gentlemen up. One was black, and one was white. And to the white man, he said, "Sir, who do you intend to vote for?" He said, "I intend to vote for Douglas. He stands for liberty." And he brought the black man up. And he said, "Sir, if you could vote, who would you vote for?" He said, "Well, I'd vote for Master Lincoln." And the speaker returned to the podium and he said, "That about sums it up, ladies and gentlemen." And about that time, an old farmer in the back row jumped up and he said, "You're darn tootin', and if you ask me, the black man's order, the inside had more good sense than the white man did." Well, this took all the air out of his balloon. But we find ourselves in a situation right now where the peace party, the Democratic Party, has claimed that the war is a failure, that the past 4 years have only proven that the instrumentality of the military machine is futile, that we must sue for an armistice. And that is the only means of obtaining peace. Well, I expect if they looked at things the way I intend to look at them this evening, they might not come to the same conclusion. Reminds me of the fella out in Illinois that walked out into the barnyard one day, and his son, about 8 years old, come running out of the barn, all upset. He said, "Pa, you better come quick. Why, Sissy's up in the haymow with the hired man, and he's taking down his pants and she's lifting up her skirts. They're fixing to pee all over our fresh cut hay." He said, "Well, son, you may have your facts right, but I think you got your conclusions wrong." So let us look at the past 4 years and the so-called futility which some are claiming is the reason why we must lay down our arms. When this war began, I think all dreaded, all sought to avert it. I believe that no one ever expected for the magnitude of the duration which it obtained. As the conclusion of the attack on Fort Sumter was beginning to break upon us, we found ourselves in a very difficult situation. We had no more than 15,000, nearly half of which were moving towards the environs of the South. The remainder, who were loyal, seemed to have all been sent out into the western environs. And we had no officer who had ever even seen a force, or certainly not commanded a force of more than 13,000. The only two that had come close to that, Scott and Bull, were both too old to sit astride a horse, so couldn't take command in the field where it was necessary. but they became valuable advisors. I requested a map. It's a trifle old, but it'll do. In the beginning, we had this upper line here, I believe, if my memory serves me right, is approximately the line upon which the difficulties had fallen in the beginning. This red line below, and you can see it from your far distance backyard, indicates where we were about a year ago. But General Scott, having been involved in the Mexican War as a very wise man, I regretted his retirement a few years ago. But one of the things that he said was, when this rebellion is put down, we shall have to restore the Union in such a way that it will be a union of hearts and hands as well as of states. Which means that whatever means are used to put down the rebellion must be the mildest of all possible, so that we can be made friends out of those who are now taking up arms against us. And so he proposed what came to be known as the Anaconda Plan. Now I see a young boy out here. Do you happen to know what an anaconda is?
No.
You don't? Well, that was my precise answer when General Scott proposed. Are there any other boys who are better informed? What is an anaconda, son?
Snake.
A snake. Yes. A political snake? No. But a large one, right? And what do they like to do? They like to squeeze. Yeah. So the plan was, rather than attack aggressively, we should surround them like the anaconda and tighten our grip and forbid them from receiving any supplies. One of the difficulties incumbent upon Southern living is their hesitancy to embrace the coming of the machine age. And some would say obstinate retention of the Jeffersonian ideal of agrarian society has put them in something of a disadvantage now. So once this war commenced, our Southern brethren found themselves in need of war machines. So there were only two major foundries in all of the South where such things could be made. So to surround them became a very workable strategy, but unfortunately, about the same time that I was elected 4 years ago, Benito Juarez was elected down in Mexico. And he concluded, as apparently some of the nations of the world are concluding, that the race of prosperity which we've witnessed all of these many years has been unparalleled and ought to be emulated. And so his stated purpose upon taking office was to form a republican government similar to what they had up north in the United States. And the European monarchs didn't like that so well. And Spain and France and England proceeded to sail over to Mexico and put a stop to that foolishness. Goodness knows, if this experiment in democracy ever catches on, there may not be any autocrats left in all of Europe in another generation or two. And so they invaded Mexico, or at least France did, and suddenly we discovered that the Europeans, who were much in favor of a stratified society, began supplying our southern brethren across the Mississippi, from the advanced Mississippi region and out of Mexico through Texas, which made the original Anaconda plan look a little more ambitious than we could manage. We would have had to surround all of Mexico and perhaps South America, but did not so more. So it was abandoned. Now, do we have any gentlemen with a military history here? Yes. Yes. Well, if you could tell me perhaps what is the oldest basic strategy in the history of armaments.
I believe, sir, is what our regiment encountered fighting in the Western Theater and General Grant's plan to strangle and cut off the supplies coming into the enemy by taking control of the rivers so they could not be supplied.
Yeah. But strategy we've already set aside. We'll have to come up with another plan. Let me ask somebody perhaps better qualified in the military, man. How about that boy? You didn't know anything about an anaconda, but I'll wager you know about this.
I just forgot.
You just forgot. Well, here's something that I reckon you have every reason to remember. In your humble home, have you ever found yourself wanting of things that you haven't been readily supplied with and needing to ask your mother for something that you need desperately?
Yes.
Of course. So is my son Terry. And generally he goes directly to his mother. However, and here's the strategy that he didn't know about. If you can't get it from your mother, then what do you do? Where do you go? Is there anyone else?
My father?
He goes to his father. You see, they call that in military terms, divide and conquer. And if mother and father have, strange as it may seem, formed an alliance against you, then there are 2 or perhaps 4 other benevolent adults that you might return to find some recourse.
The police?
The police. No, I don't think you have to get quite so desperate. If your parents do not avail, well, who?
My sister.
Grandparents. That's why God made them. So, you see, the strategy, divide and conquer, became the only one left, but perhaps the most effective. And we began to consider where would the best possible, well, now for you in the back there, this is actually a map of the eastern part of the United States. But for those of you in the front, can you see where might be an obvious place to divide a rebellious South? The Mississippi River. Can you spell it? I-T. I asked if you could spell it. Now, the Mississippi River, which way does that flow? To the south. That's a good thing. We don't want poor old Minnesota to flood unnecessarily. So, the difficulty with this plan, which was an excellent plan, the Mississippi River Campaign was proposed on numerous occasions, but has anyone ever heard of the Merrimack and the Monitor? What were they? They were ships. Now the Monitor was our ship, but the Merrimack used to be our ship. And the rebels sunk it. And then you know what they did? They dredged it up and clothed it in iron. So, and then they've been using it against us. Now, the difficulty with the waters flowing to the south is, if some of our gunboats should be disabled, which way would they flow? To the south. And what could happen? The whole fleet of Merrimacks could be turned and used against us. So that plan also was shared. And it looked like we had no recourse. But then one day, I was struck forcefully with the wisdom of a particular military plan that came to my attention. Unfortunately, it was not by a military man. I'm sorry, this is not your night. fact, it was not by a gentleman at all. It was a civilian woman who came to my office with a proposal that was absolutely astounding. She had been studying and gone, she lived in Maryland, and gone through libraries and obtained maps and discovered that just a little to the east of the Mississippi is another river that also runs north and south, but that one does not empty into the Gulf of Mexico. That one flows to the Ohio because of the Appalachian Mountains. And she, to make certain of this plan before she concluded to bring it to my attention, traveled at her own expense all the way to rebellious St. Louis. And you people here in Missouri know all about that. Can't trust anybody out here. And began making inquiries from shop to shop, bookstore to bookstore, libraries, other such establishments, as to whether or not this river, the Tennessee River, was navigable and how far down. After carefully inquiring, she discovered that it was navigable all the way to Muscle Shoals in Alabama. With that information, she proposed that we steam up the Tennessee River, which would be down into the south, and take some of the fortifications that were here and come to the back door of the great citadel of the Mississippi. Other than island number 10, a little farther up in Memphis, the greatest difficulty of taking the Mississippi River was at Vicksburg. Because the Mississippi River flows in front of the city 3 times. How could a river do that? It makes a great S curve. And behind the city is set on a hill. And behind it is swamps, plantations, southern bells, crocodiles, and all sorts of things that can distract soldiers. So it appeared that it could not be taken until Miss Carroll proposed to steam up the Tennessee River. That's when I first discovered General Grant, who was stationed in St. Louis under Howard. And he took gunboats, steamed up the river to Fort Henry and Donaldson a year after the struggles had commenced. And thence began his approach to Vicksburg. It took him from February 62 to July 63. But do any of you know what happened in July 63, a little over a year ago? Gettysburg. That's right. And Gettysburg, in some respects, was a distraction to the great theater of war that you all understand took place in the West. Because at that same time, Grant finally succeeded after many attempts in taking Vicksburg and opened up the Mississippi. That was our first major objective, and we have retained it ever since. What was the second? We succeeded in dividing it this way. The second was we had the Upper South, which remained loyal, but was being threatened by rebels from the Deep South. And, of course, the Lower South and Deep South. And so, for strategic purposes, and to secure those loyal souls who were seeking to support the Union, especially in the eastern part of Tennessee, a division in this direction became the next and great second objective. Tennessee. It runs across the middle of the South. That took nearly another year. The struggles for Tennessee actually are continuing now, but were finally secured last fall in Chattanooga. Now, I don't know if you can see very well, but the Appalachian Mountains that run up and down here are very difficult to navigate. Just ask General Butler and a few others who never had any success getting into eastern Tennessee. But because of that, most of the rail lines run on the southeast corridor in what they call the Piedmont. There's only one line that runs through those mountains up to Atlanta and Chattanooga, and that keeps supplies flowing into Richmond. And so from Chattanooga in eastern Tennessee, where the struggles took place last fall, when General Grant went across Tennessee and secured the entire state and then secured Chattanooga, I was convinced I had a man now that could fight. You know that in the midst of all of this significance here in the West, there was a lot of fussing going on in the East and no success. I don't even wish to talk about that. But what happened was our next great objective had been reached. From that point, we discovered that we were strong enough now that we could make one final thrust this direction, and we would have divided the enemy 3 times. That brings us to the present. Grant began to move up this direction, down towards Washington, but the deciding and signal difference between Grant and the illustrious General McClellan was that Grant was willing to keep his army between the national capital and the rebel center of activity. If you wish to call it a capital, you may. Just don't let me hear you. And McClellan insisted on going below them, which opened us up for attack. That's exactly what would have happened to the entire country had he succeeded. So let's start over with that. Just don't make floors like they used to. Thank you. Just stand back for the rest of you. So, you best turn this in mind. If we can do that without another collapse. I don't think we can. Do you have a small piece of carpet? We may survive. In fact, I just happen to have a carpet bag. This will do. So what happened was Grant moved up this direction and began very successfully, at the cost of many lives, to work his way down towards Richmond. Always keeping Washington, well, not always, but generally keeping Washington safe. And while he was doing that, he sent Sherman into Atlanta. That brings us to the present. We have, and this is what the Democratic Party will not tell you, obtained and achieved 2 signal and fatal blows and victories. The division of the South that way and this way, and we are commencing now another. You won't read that in the newspapers. When they say the war is a failure, they're not telling you that. Not only have we achieved those divisions, we've been able to hold them. Now, we're in a crisis at the moment. After it became clear that we had a siege going on down here in Petersburg and in Atlanta, the Peace Party formed and said the war's a failure. How long has it been since we've been trying to obtain victory in Richmond? Years? Why does anyone think that I found something, but thank you. Why does anyone think that it'll take less time to break through in Atlanta? And so we now have the Peace Party saying the war's a failure and we must sue for an end of hostilities. an armistice, a cessation, bring the soldiers home. What they're not saying is, if we sue for peace now, the rebels will have obtained what they wished. I believe that there is no rebel commander in the South at present that believes that this war can be won militarily any longer. But I do believe they all understand well that it could be won politically in the coming election. So they're saying the war is a failure. In fact, they're saying we want peace. It's Lincoln who won't allow it. That's what Niagara was all about. When I sent the editor of the Tribune, Mr. Greeley, our good friend, who felt it was necessary to do this, up to Niagara, I told him there was 2 conditions on which I was immovable. Number 1, no Southern independence. And number 2, no slavery. And I am soundly criticized now for doing that. And they're saying the South wants peace, and it's Lincoln who refuses to give in because he will not allow Southern independence, and he will not allow the Union as it was. They're right. I won't. The difficulty is, if the Peace Party wins, and Thurlow Weed, who is probably one of the most influential Republicans in the country, says everybody now, North as well as South, Republican as well as Democrat, radical as well as conservative, is wild for peace by any means. And that's where I think we need to stop and reflect. If we allow for peace now, my friends, not only will all of the lives that have been spent and lost heretofore up to this juncture have been spent for nothing, but we will have destroyed the premise, the foundation upon which free government stands. We have in this country a government where a substantial number of our citizens can enter in to the direction of that government, either individually or through their representatives. Now, in any government, whether it's something federalized as this one or small government, there is very often unanimity impossible. And there is a necessity for coming up with a system. If Mrs. Lincoln and I have a difference of opinion, we have worked out a system through which we pass. And this is the system. She makes all the big decisions, and I make all the small ones. So far, there haven't been any small ones. No, that's not really our system. But the point is, our system says majorities will rule, whether in certain cases, like the Constitutional Convention, it's 3/4 majority, or with the Senate 2/3, or in an election 50% or more. We have a system established that all have agreed to. However, if an election such as we had 4 years ago takes place, and the majority speaks, and the minority will not acquiesce, which is what happened, and instead says, give us what we want or there will be blood, then what have we just done? If we give it to them, we return to a government of the minority. How is it any different than what autocrats and kings and the ruling families of Europe have done for generations? So, we cannot simply acquiesce at this juncture with all of this history behind us. The second plank on the platform of the Peace Party is the Union as it was. I'll speak to that. But let me just say, as I saw the handwriting on the wall this past summer, and I also remember that it's been 30 years since this country has re-elected any president, all the way back since Jackson, I realized that it was very unlikely that I probably would be re-elected. And if I was defeated, then it would become my duty to somehow win this war as quickly as possible before next March, when the new president would be inaugurated, because surely he would lose it all then. I've been trying to do that for 4 years. So, I didn't actually speak to the cabinet about it, but I wrote something out and I asked them all to sign it, and I left it sealed. And I went home that night, and I wrote out a proclamation. Because when I left Illinois, I told the people then that the task ahead of me was greater than I was, and that without their prayers, I would not succeed. And this is what I wrote. I said in July that I wish to see the people in all quarters of the country convene at our usual places of worship, wherever they might be. First of all, confess and repent of our manifold sins, and then to begin to implore the compassion and forgiveness of the Almighty. That if it would be consistent with His will, this existing state of things, this rebellion, might be suppressed. That the Constitution and the laws of the United States might once again be established in this country as the law of the land. I ask the people to implore Him as the supreme ruler of this world, not to destroy us as a people, or to suffer us to be destroyed by our own obstinate adhesions to human counsel, which might be in conflict with His eternal purposes. And then I ask that we might implore Him to enlighten the mind of this nation to know and to do His will, believing that this place should be maintained as a united people among the family of nations. And I left it there. I still began to work, but I concluded that what the Democratic Party was attempting to do by any means, whether by an armistice or by restoring the Union as it was without emancipation, was doomed to failure. It would result in either case in mismembering the Union. The slightest acquaintance with arithmetic would prove to anyone that if we absolved ourselves of the help of the Black Man, which now number about 200,000 in fighting trim force, there are not enough white men left to finish the job. And once those men were disbanded, they would join the Southerners once again, and we would be at war with two nations. I concluded that we could not conciliate the South when they had mastery and control of millions of colored people, knowing that having that control would give them ultimate success. We couldn't even begin to let them think that that would be the eventuality. The whole strategy of the Democratic Party depends on conciliation don't wish to offend anybody or stand for anything. He has to confine himself to that policy in order to be true to his principles of peace, which means he has to abandon all the posts that are now possessed by the black man, surrender all those advantages to the enemy. And if that happened, my friends, I'm convinced that the war would conclude in favor of the rebels in 3 weeks. We need all of our 5, 6, 700,000 that are now in to hold what we have thus far gained and to continue making gains until this war is over. Now, there are those who are saying, I'm carrying on this war for the sole purpose of abolition. I've got some letters here. Let me make it clear. This war is being carried out for the sole purpose of restoring the Union, the same as I said 4 years ago. But no human power, my friends, can subdue so gigantic a rebellion without using the emancipation lever as I have done. Freedom has given us control of some 200,000 black warriors, and it will give us more before this all is over. They condemn my emancipation policy. Some of them because they're war Democrats who have told their constituents that it is a temporary measure. It is a war measure. But let me read some of these letters to you. I'm a war Democrat, the editor of a Democratic paper. I have sustained your administration because it is the legally constituted government. I sustained your war policy, not because I endorsed it, but because it presented the only available method of putting down this rebellion. It has been alleged that because I and my friends have sustained the emancipation measure, that we are now abolitionists. Our reply has been, we regard the freeing of the black man as sound war policy in that it deprives the South of laborers and then weakens the rebellion. And that has been a good argument. But since Niagara, that argument has disappeared. We were once greatly comforted and strengthened by assurance that the proclamation was a war policy. Here's another one. The Niagara Falls peace movement was of no importance whatsoever, except that it resulted in bringing out to the public your declaration, as we understand it, that no steps can be taken towards peace unless accompanied with the abandonment of slavery. This puts the whole war question on a very new basis, and it takes us war Democrats clear off of our feet. It leaves us no ground to stand on in order to support you. If we sustain the war and the war policy, it demands us to change our fundamental politics, which are the Union as it was. I could read you more of these. My point being, Negroes, my friend, like all other people, act upon motives. Why should they do anything for us if we will not do something for them? They are presently staking their lives, leaving their families behind and putting their lives on the line. And they must be prompted by the very strongest motive possible in order to do it. The promise of freedom. And the promise has been made. And I believe it must be kept. Is there anyone here who desires that I would say, I made the promise, but as soon as it's convenient, I must break it? I think not. But there have been those who have proposed to me blatantly and openly that I break my promise to the black warriors of Olustee and Port Hudson in order to conciliate the South and bring the war to an end. I have two reasons for I will not be there. First, it's a question of morals. When this country was inaugurated by General Washington, he said this: there's no truth more thoroughly established than this. There exists in the economy and course of nature an indissoluble union between virtue and happiness. And we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected upon a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. So, how could such treachery to hundreds of thousands of people by any possibility escape the very curse of God himself? I personally would be damned in time and eternity by breaking such a promise. And so I conclude, the world will yet know that I will keep faith, both to my friends and to my present enemies. My second reason is simply a matter of policy. To announce such a purpose, that we will support the Union as it was in order to win an election, all recruiting of the black men would instantly cease. All the colored men now in our service, hundreds of thousands, would instantly desert us, and rightfully. Why would they give their lives for us, when they have just received full notice that we intend to betray them? If we take the support of the colored man now and drive it back into the hands of the enemy, neither this administration nor any administration in the future will save this union. If we take it from our hands now and give it to the enemy, some 150, 200, 250,000 colored persons, we can no longer sustain the contest. There is no party, be it Republican or Democrat, who can finish this war on the platform of restoring the Union and slavery, because it would of necessity lose the colored support. And they cannot hope, but they can still fight. So that is the present situation, and I think, like the old farmer said 4 years ago, it's pretty plain who's got the sense. Even McClellan, when he finally accepted the nomination on the peace platform, did it with reservation. He said, restoration of a union not being a condition upon which an armistice could be made, he wouldn't support it. He could not accept the nomination and then face the very men who served under him without insurmountable shame. They had selected a war candidate and forced him to stand on the peace platform. And my friend, that is why only 3 times since the campaign began has anyone ever seen McClellan in public. He made a very large gathering and met them in Orange, in New Jersey, where he lives. And since then, no one's seen him. He understands, just like that old farmer did, the common sense of numbers. One other little bit of common sense. They said we couldn't take Atlanta. Was it possible? Beginning of last month. I issued 100-gun salutes, orders that they give thanks to these brave men who put their lives on the line so that this union can be restored throughout the country. That's what all the ruckus was about last month. One last thing I did was I issued proclamation of thanksgiving. I believe the Almighty has heard our prayers. I will conclude by reading there. But one last thing I wish to say. We must continue to seek the aid of the Heavenly Hand that has guided us thus far. After Hood was driven out of Atlanta, he concluded to go west and drive his forces up again into Tennessee, toward Nashville, perhaps Cincinnati, perhaps even Chicago. It's again a political ploy. And here in Missouri, the same thing has happened. Pierce was sent in to take St. Louis and Jefferson City. Fortunately, he's driven out and is headed for parts west, but it's not over yet. But I believe an acknowledgement of the divine hand is most appropriate. And after that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may wish to tender. This will be officially issued on the 20th of this month, October 1864. It has pleased Almighty God to prolong our national life another year, defending us with his guardian care against unfriendly designs from abroad, vouchsafing to us his mercy and many signal victories of late over the enemy, who is of our own household. It has also pleased our Heavenly Father to favor as well as citizens in their homes, as our soldiers in their camps, and sailors on the rivers and seas with unusual health. He has greatly augmented our free population by emancipation and immigration, and opened to us new sources of wealth, crowned the labor of our working people in every department of industry with abundant rewards. I, therefore, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, hereby set apart the last Thursday in November next as a day which I desire to be observed by my fellow citizens, wherever they might be, as a day of thanksgiving and praise to Almighty God. I do further recommend to all of my fellow citizens that on this occasion we all reverently humble ourselves in the dust, and from thence offer up continued prayer and supplication to the great disposer of events for the return of the inestimable blessings of our Constitution, peace and harmony throughout this land. So that will be issued in a few days. And I personally invite you to join me next month. I thank you also for your kind audience, and if there are any who wish to tender questions about any of the things that I have alluded to, or questions that perhaps I have not answered, I will be more than happy to do so, as long as it doesn't have too much to do with snakes.
Mr. Lincoln,
Does have a question, so
I am a recently discharged veteran. I have spent 3 years in the Federal Army. I will admit that in the previous election, I voted for the opposition to you. However, looking back on a newspaper I read referring to your remarks at Gettysburg on the 19th of November last, when you said that these dead shall not have died in vain, the way I understand, you're standing on your promise of restoring the Union without slavery that you have made both to the white and African citizens of this country. You have proposed a course of action that these men will, as well as my comrades in the 24th Missouri, will not have died in vain. And I thank you for that, and you will have my vote in November.
Thank you, sir. We stand on the shoulders of many who have gone before us. We must stand strong and tall if we intend to continue. Anybody else? Will you You've been a marvelous audience, and I thank you. I will remain here for the duration of the evening if you would like to come up and chat, and or make images, or